good to be back with you. The problem with spending so many weeks off the stage, I come to enjoy it because I get a great deal of personal fulfillment and enjoyment out of seeing and hearing from the incredible voices that we have within our community and those who are connected to us. The other problem, though, is that my mind gets going and I start reading, and then I write about 4 weeks worth of notes into one talk. I'm going to do my best. If I had my way, I could tell you that this book, which I'm going to be referencing heavily, The Chalice and the Blade by Ryan Esler, that I'm throwing around on the stage. If I had my way, I would just sit and read this book to you, because about 5 or 6 years ago when I first read it, this is from 1984, it changed the way I saw the beginnings of my faith, and it was instrumental in my personal deconstruction because, like many of you, I came from a religious tradition that predominantly saw the divine as male and used masculine terms and masculine attributes. And I wrestled with much of what I inherited in my tradition when I read the Old Testament, and I saw passages in Deuteronomy where the instructions were given on what a man should do if he rapes a woman and she becomes pregnant, and how he can choose to repay the father, not out of obligation of what was done and the harm to the woman, but because the father lost a dowry, he lost his investment. And I came to agree heartily with Ryan's description of dividing this human organization of structure into two predominant forms, the dominator model and the partnership model. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to do my best to get through it. And it is intentional having myself, having Bob talking in this series, because this is not a series about women. This is Women's History Month, and we're exploring lots of aspects of things that are connecting to women, but it is far broader because this is something that both genders own, which is the way that we have structured and ordered the world has been done in such a way that it perpetuates a dominator style of organization, a binary, an either or at the expense of a partnership model. A couple weeks ago, Beth talked and introduced us to a word that I have been using a lot because I love it. It's the word syzygy, and this idea of a perfect alignment, which we witnessed. And I like thinking about the masculine and the feminine with that kind of yin and yang imagery as holding these things in equal balance. And as a cisgender white male, it is not my responsibility to try to be anything other than who I am while balancing the polarities of my feminine archetypes and my masculine archetypes, and knowing when I am out of balance in this world. And so, since a lot of this content tends to be heavy and it's kind of a nice dark, kind of a gray hazy morning, I actually was a big fan of the musical style. Those were some really funky chords you were playing, like nasty chords. And I think that will balance out kind of some of these topics. First, let's talk about a certain naked fat woman that's joining me on the stage. And I say this with great reverence, and I use that word intentionally because we are not body shaming. And we'll pass this around because I want everybody to tangibly, physically hold this. Anybody know what this is called? This is a famous find from about 30,000 years ago. This is the Venus of Wilmore. Willendorf. And the Venus of Willendorf was discovered in Willendorf, Austria. It's about 30,000 years old. And if you'll notice when you pass it around, you'll see it's faceless. Archaeologists kind of have questions as to why it was sculpted in this way. But this is representative of thousands of Venus figurines, what some archaeologists called fertility goddesses, that have been found throughout Europe, dating back to about 30,000 years ago in the Paleolithic era. As it gets passed around, I want you to note, you can bring out your inner middle school child and note the large breasts, the wide birthing hip, the carefully sculpted vulva. This was the divine and was what was known as the divine for about 20 times longer in our human history than what we consider to be God as the masculine. We'll start passing this around. As we pass this around, just go ahead and hold it. This is a scale replica. And the idea was that she represented what people understood to be the creatress of life. Because let me ask you a question. If you're an early person and if you're looking at the magic of conception, when you see the miracle of birth, where does new life come from? From the female. The female is the womb, the giver of life. Gaia, or this understanding of our planet as being a feminine force, the womb of the earth, giving birth to everything that we know. And yes, we can couch it in scientific terms like Darwin did and talk about the origin of the species, but we go far enough back and we realize that all of this came birthed out of this womb of this earth and the womb of the universe. And so it was no surprise that for thousands of years, the feminine was considered to be the source of life, the source of divinity. I'm also going to pass around, we'll pass around on both sides. In a lot of the early graves and a lot of the early ritual sites, there were thousands of these cowrie shells. Anybody seen a cowrie shell? And as you get past this around here, I'll pass one on both sides. Take one with you home. So grab one from the bowl, take it with you. Don't keep the Venus statue. Take a shell. These Venus statues are found throughout great swaths of Europe. A lot of early Paleolithic grave sites were covered in these cowrie shells and ochre. And again, if you channel your inner 14-year-old and you look at this shell, what does that look like to you? Okay, you can giggle, it's okay. It very much bears a striking resemblance to the female anatomy, the birthing. When you look at that statue, as you hold as it comes around, this wasn't seen as something to be despised or looked down upon. When we talk about it, we chuckle and we call it fat, because today, by our standards, we would be horrified at a body image being held up like that. But to the people who traveled, and as we now know, were incredibly intelligent, capable of advanced thought, architecture, design, and organization prior to agricultural development. These organizational structures were primarily partnership-driven, and to those who were worshiping or connecting with the divine, when you see that statue, when you hold it, the wide birthing hips, the nurturing breasts, the sculpted vulva, the cycle of life that emerges from the feminine and doesn't just emerge from the feminine, but is nurtured by the woman. And we also know that these early societies were far more egalitarian and far more organized, not in some Amazonian standard where it's all women making all the rules all the time. No, in a partnership model, we found that women and men shared power, preaching, rites, and rituals, and shared them all equally. Merlin Stone, in her book, When God Was a Woman, says, in the beginning, people prayed to the creatress of life, the mistress of heaven. At the very dawn of religion, God was a woman. Do you remember? We know that for 20 times as long as recorded human history, the divine was understood to be feminine. I'm reminded of Carl Sagan's quotes where he says, we are like butterflies who flutter for a day and think it is forever. We look at our recorded history that's handed down to us. We did this in the pre-talk over there. If I ask you to think about the early inception, the early creation of what we would consider religion, how far back would you go if you consider the world religions? How many thousands of years? In our pre-talk, we kind of came up with somewhere between 6, 8, maybe 10,000 years. The amount of time that we've had recorded history and some of the earliest formations of what we would consider to be some of the world religions. But we know that that Venus statue that you're holding is passing around was from the from the late Paleolithic, that's at least 25 to 30,000 years old. We know that the civilizations that came from that time were capable of advanced art and architecture, of social structure, and of religious thoughts. And that perhaps the absence of the feminine divine in our history books and in our social origins isn't because it wasn't there, but because it was stamped out by dominator-style religions and dominator-style patriarchies that came through and systematically deprived us of our cultural origin stories. Our perspective is limited by both our lifespan and our cultural inheritance. Even archaeology, what we consider archaeology today, the things that we know that we think we know about the way the world was, is a relatively new science that developed only after the couple last world wars. And of course was pioneered primarily by who? Indiana Jones. Yes, thank you. I was looking for that one. And Indiana Jones is a man. A lot of architecture, a lot of the early foundations of our architectural understandings were written by men, and not the most culturally woke men either. So imagine you're an archaeologist and you dig up these female statues. What do? You call them fertility cults. Isn't it strange how the divine in history, when seen as a masculine, as a father, as a powerful Lord and ruler, is elevated to a religion and a spiritual thought? But the feminine is a cult, and the priestesses are witches. These are intentional things that we've lost in our world. Merlin Stone said, the suppression, I love this quote, of women's rights, R-I-G-H-T, began with the suppression of women's rights, R-I-T-E-S. When we began to lose the feminine archetypes in our culture, in our society, we lost thousands of years of wisdom. And this is not just simply what you'll find in this book from 1984 or Merlin Stone's When God is a Woman. We now are continuing to get even more understandings. A couple of the books that some people mentioned, anybody read Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, talks about this early understanding. In the book that I'm currently wading through, it's a dense book. It's called The Dawn of Everything. covers great swaths of time that we are now beginning to learn about. And it fascinates me that there's more history. We're human beings. We're not lazy apes going around clubbing people, unintelligibly moving through the world. There was periods of time in human history where we structured ourselves in a more partnership, egalitarian way, driven through a partnership style of seeing the world. Much of it coming from the way that we see and approach the divine. Because if the God that you're told about as a kid is a judgmental, angry God who is going to punish you for your sins, is it no surprise that that judgmental anger comes out in the form of so many people who practice a religion that claims to be about love and acceptance and understanding? And we still do see the emergence of the feminine trying to fight its way through. But of course we know that when we look at much of the scriptures we've inherited, so much of it comes from men, was compiled and written by men who came together to systematically stamp out partnership styles of organization. If you read the Old Testament through this lens and look at all the times that Jehovah told his people to stamp out the idolatry that was in their midst, as some even worshipped the Queen of Heaven. The early fertility cults were actively still in practice, but were being stamped out because dominator-style religion didn't have a place for partnerships. It was conquer and control. Let's talk about the differences between these for just a little bit, at least as Ryan explains in her book, The Chalice and the Blade. The partnership model of structuring, this is, again, not biological male and female. You get this? This is archetypal understandings. This is a partnership way of orienting yourself in society versus a dominator style. And in the partnership model, it's defined by linking rather than the ranking of genders, working together as genders in partnership. It is about mutual respect and nonviolence. We now know that warfare was not the norm of humanity for tens of thousands of years. We can see even in recent archaeological unearthings here in North America that indigenous peoples lived together in various ways and still managed to come together. That partnership styles of organization do not necessarily lead to warfare, murder, and control. It's an equal valuing of the masculine as well as the feminine principles. And it's a social structure based on connection rather than domination. The domination model, rigid hierarchies and authoritarianism. Male dominance and the devaluation of feminine qualities. Violence or the threat of violence as a means of control. And a belief in the inherent right of some to rule over others. Every society that has had slavery, that has had ownership of people, can trace its history back to the very earliest scriptures that talk about the ways that fathers can sell their daughters in a dowry partnership and how women had no voice, no control, no contribution. I'm going to give you a tinfoil hat comment, so you can take this now for being my personal viewpoint here, and I'm going to get a little bit conspiratorial here for a second. I think that the biggest conspiracy, the biggest load of shit that we have been sold is not the Illuminati, it's not some hidden cabal at work in our governments. It's the systematic destruction and removal of, erasure of partnership-based societies from our archaeological records, from our historical records, designed to convince us that domination rather than partnership is the natural order of things. We assume, because like Carl Sagan said, we blink our eyes and assume it's forever and forget that we're part of a multi-millennia history of human beings, that there are ways of ordering ourselves in the world that are different than what we assume to be the norm. And it's being sold to us as the natural order of things. We naturally would have evolved to be survival of the fittest and the strongest. And of course, the male is stronger, and so the male is going to dominate. How could evolution have produced anything but? But we see that in nature, partnership rather than domination is actually the natural order of things. That Gaia, our planet, thrives in symbiosis of working together. We learn about reciprocity, both in nature and in so many of the nature-based religions that have been, of course, systematically stamped out, papered over. Ryan Esler says, both the mythical and archaeological evidence indicate that perhaps the most notable quality of the pre-dominator mind was its recognition of our oneness with all nature. If there was a common aspect to these religions that we find before there was as much written down, but what we can determine based upon both the archaeological evidence, we learn that the people who were buried and recognized and entombed were not always the most powerful kings and lords. We see burials for children, disabled people, people who had to be cared for and nurtured by a society at a time when we said that that wasn't possible because they weren't egalitarian enough to develop this type of thinking. But we know that there were times of history where the feminine archetypes were accessible to all of us, regardless of gender. And we didn't have to live in such a binary understanding. And it's sad because domination culture has limited both men and women from living out their full potential in the world. We've lost something. Ryan says, if the central religious figure was a woman giving birth, and not, as in our time, a man dying on a cross, it would not be unreasonable to infer that life and the love of life, rather than death and the fear of death, were dominant in society as well as in art. Where you start the story matters. I'm going to, as a man raised in a dominator style of religion, living in a dominator culture that prizes masculine dominator traits, I have to work daily to recognize these dominator tendencies because it's all around us. We're swimming in it. But this isn't the way that it was. It's not the way that it has to be. So how do we move forward? We move forward in balance, in balancing these energies. In relationships, it's practicing conscious partnership. I think back to my last ministry position when we were managing a church. We had a church management software. I've told Shannon this. And there was a field, a data field that was required for each person and each family unit called head of household. Has anyone ever filled out a form and seen that? And of course, we know the Christian understanding of who the head of the household is. We're surrounded by this either or instead of the both and. Notice where dominator thinking influences our interactions. We can practice this balancing of energy by reclaiming holistic ways of thinking, challenging an either-or thinking where we see it, and false binaries, and recognize the interconnectedness of ourselves with everything. Some of the most fascinating fields of study I'm reading right now are from people like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who talks about reciprocity, not only in nature, but how even economic models are discovering ways of partnership that doesn't have to be about the capitalist system of winner take all. There are economic models of reciprocity and partnership that are available to us, and we stamp it out. We balance these energies by honoring the feminine, especially in spiritual practices. And that's what we strive to do here at C3. We choose to elevate these feminine perspectives and voices because we are all better for it as a community. I become a better man when I learn how to tap into my feminine archetypes. Some women who in our society have exhibited strong masculine qualities of leadership, Sarah Cornfield told us, those voices were systematically ignored and pushed away and overwritten in our history. It's honoring the voices. And I'll just spend the last 90 seconds here talking about specifically what can we as men do. Because as biological men, regardless of your sexual orientation, we carry a way of being and functioning in the world. And as men, we can acknowledge that dominator systems have harmed us too. I would almost say that they have harmed men in such profound ways that we don't even begin to know what our next generations are going to look like, because the young boys have lost rites of passage, have lost male role models, and the next thing you know, you have Andrew Tates and you have all these toxic masculine examples held up and no one to know where to go. Dominator conditioning has limited our expression as men. Ryan Esler says women's rights are not just women's business. The repression of the feminine half of humanity is also and especially men's loss. It's choosing to share power rather than hoard it. It's actively supporting women's leadership without taking over, without mansplaining, without having to give the men's version of it, without having to give that stamp of approval. It's elevating the voices of those who speak truth, and it's modeling partnership values for other men and boys. Ryan said that we need new narratives to give us a more complete and accurate picture of who we are and who we can be. I want to close with this short reading. If I could see the Venus. I'll have this on display at the table back there because most of us have grown up in a religious tradition where we've seen religious iconography around us, and I'm guessing it probably didn't look like this. In the beginning, she was. She, Gaia, the creator, the source of life, the source of wisdom, the womb of the world. May she rise again in our understanding. May she guide us back to balance. May she bless us as we reclaim a world of partnership, wholeness, and love in this world. Namaste.